Hello, it's Brenda Grung, she, hers. I'm the memory care specialist for Anthology Senior Living. And as it turns out, I happen to be at the Alzheimer's Association National Leadership Summit, and I thought this was the perfect place to record this video. So this is a follow-up to the live virtual quarterly family education session that we did about a week ago in mid-January. And I promised to record a version for people who couldn't join. So this session is on communication tips. And so we're going to do a brief introduction to dementia, just so that we're all on the same page with the same amount of information. I think that'll give us a good place to lean into communication tips. So we'll talk through 5 communication tips in particular. Then I'll share a few other additional methods for your back pocket or for your follow-up later. And then at the end, I'll share some resources for further reading or viewing, whichever you prefer. So to start out, very often, in fact, just a few hours ago, I was talking with somebody and they said, now dementia and Alzheimer's, aren't those the same things? Don't those terms mean the same? And let's all get on the same page first. Dementia is what's called an umbrella term. It's a general term. It's a collection of symptoms. It's not actually a diagnosis. And you see on the right-hand side of the screen that dementia umbrella image. And then you see some of the most common forms of dementia, the most common specific diagnoses. So I'm going to say a sentence or two about each of them so that you have just kind of a good frame of reference, and then we'll pivot into some of the common dementia symptoms. So Alzheimer's disease, most common form of dementia. It is caused by the collection of naturally forming proteins that tend to clump up in the brain. And if you think of the brain's neural network like a net, those proteins will clump up and cause the strands of the net to break. And so that's where you'll see the impacted brain after that. Vascular dementia is associated with blood loss to the brain, or what we might think of as strokes. So vascular dementia, I think what's helpful for us to know, there's a couple things, but for many of the other dementias, there is a steady decrease of ability. But for vascular dementia, you'll tend to see your person sort of on a plateau and then have a sudden decrease in ability, and then plateau and then sudden decrease. So sort of that stair step. It's always good if your person is experiencing a sudden change in ability, temperament, etc. It's good to get that checked out to make sure something else isn't going on. Lewy body dementia, this is an umbrella within itself, and has an I'm sorry, I misspoke about that. Has an umbrella of itself, and often, not always, but often the person with Lewy body may experience hallucinations or paranoia. Lewy body will often have dementia symptoms first, and then later in the dementia journey may have movement systems or musculature symptoms that appear similar to Parkinson's disease. So Parkinson's related dementia is the opposite order. So you have the movement and impacted muscle function first, and then sometimes later in the disease journey, the person can develop Parkinson's related dementia, similar to Lewy body, but in a different order. Then frontotemporal degeneration, I think, is probably the least known of the most common dementias. And I always make sure to say a few things about it because it is so less known and because it often presents quite differently. So FTD itself is also an umbrella and has a number of specific diagnoses under it. but often affects people younger, even in their 40s. Within FTD, some of the common categories are behavioral variant, and that is where the person's personality behavior is significantly impacted. There's primary progressive aphasia, there's corticobasal, there's progressive supranuclear palsy. There's a bunch of different things. I don't mean to get in the weeds or show off that I've practiced saying these words. But the important part to know with FTD is very often not memory impacted, but the frontal lobe impacted. And what is helpful for us to know there is the frontal lobe is our executive function. It's where we filter, it's where we have impulse control, it's where we make decisions. And so with FTD, you'll often see this change in impact in personality. And then just a little clarification on the bottom right where it says mixed dementia. Now, I said before that dementia, the term, is not a diagnosis. The slight exception there is something called mixed dementia, and all that means is it's multiple dementias that a single person experiences. So there's a lot going on in this slide, but I pulled this together specifically to highlight a few things. Dementias in general are whole brain diseases. And so I think when we hear dementia, we often hear or think of short-term memory loss. But you see on the list here on the right, there are many other common impacts in the dementia journey. Now, when we spoke a moment ago about the specific diagnoses and the list you see here, it doesn't mean that all of these occur with all of the diagnoses, but these are pretty common in the various dementia journeys, so I want to be sure to highlight them. So before I read through the list though, what you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen, the top row are brain scans of a healthy brain. The bottom row are brain scans of a brain with advanced Alzheimer's. And so I want to encourage you, just take a moment and see how the top and the bottom rows look different to you. When I talk with people, they'll often mention on the bottom row, there's that huge gap or dark spot or hole. They'll often note, you see sort of the fingers going into the brain, so sort of like a shrinkage of the brain, a decreased size. You see a lot more gaps in the brain with advanced Alzheimer's. So I think this is helpful for us to see, really for a couple reasons. One, when our person has, in this case with this brain scan, these brain scans, Alzheimer's, we can't see it. It's not like a broken arm or something. So I show these just to illustrate how much of the brain is impacted. The other thing, though, the other reason I share these is because I think it's easy for us to see how much is lost in the dementia journey, but I also want to highlight what remains. And what remains is what we can use to better connect with our person. And so we'll talk through, when we talk through some of those strategies, that's where it's coming from. So on the right-hand side, I already shared a handful of these as I was describing the specific diagnoses, but I want to speak about a few of them here. So it's common for many of the dementias to impact somebody's verbal communication ability. So that may be, the physical act of speaking with, for example, primary progressive aphasia. It may simply be a slower time in processing what that verbal communication is. And it may also be a slower response time. So we're going to talk in a minute in the communication tips, but a good thing to do here is to speak slowly and give time. But we'll talk about that more. Sort of getting ahead of myself. I'm so excited to share this. The second bullet point, visual processing changes. And I think these are probably a surprise for many families and professionals. What can often be impacted is just the field of view. So how much, sorry, you can't see my hands. So like where our person is visually seeing. So their periphery might be impacted. Later in the dementia journey, they may just have this little bit, or maybe even sort of a binocular view or even a monocular view. So visual processing changes, these are important for us to keep in mind, us as loved ones or professionals, because how our person is seeing or perceiving what they are physically seeing will impact how we're able to connect, or what may startle them, or what may give them comfort or discomfort. Can also be depth perception or misperceiving objects. We talked a bit on the last slide about that diminished executive function, but I want to say a couple of things, or sort of emphasize a couple of things. So diminished executive function, that's where, you hate when I wear this jacket, but you don't say anything. Instead, you say, oh, I love your glasses. You filter out what you say, or you choose to say things a certain way. An impacted executive function may be a person who just says, I hate when you wear that jacket, or gosh, you look like you don't look good, or, these sort of like impulsive statements. Impacted decision-making, impacted initiative. I think of initiative as like the ability to get going, get started. And an impacted ability to complete a multi-stepped action. And so when we talk through the communication tips, we'll keep this in mind as well. I mentioned before with Lewy body and Parkinson's related dementia specifically, there can be, not always, there can be hallucinations and paranoia. And the thing I think is helpful for us to know about hallucinations is it's often like a small being, like a small animal, a child, insects, small. And your person, if they are visually hallucinating, they may even say, you see that kid that's not there. Like they recognize that it's not there, but they are seeing it sometimes. But you can have auditory hallucinations as well. Paranoia or suspicion. So paranoia is where I think like you're all out to get me, or I see two people together and I think they're cheating on me, or I've lost my keys again, and instead of like retracing my steps to try to find them, I say, you always take my keys. You always put them in these weird places. Personality changes we talked about, impacted short-term memory. So very often in many, but not all of the dementia journeys, there will be impacted short-term memory, which could be short-term as in, I just walked in this room, or what I had for lunch earlier, or further ago than that. Often, as our person is on their dementia journey, their older memories will still stay intact. So that's something we can use to be able to better connect. And we'll talk through that as well. And then this last bullet point, this is my wording. I say our person may be more like emotionally rooted at an earlier time in their life. So maybe my person lives with me, or my person lives at an Anthology community, and we're talking about home, but they're referencing the farm where they grew up in Nebraska, or their first flat, or where they lived most of their adult life. There's sort of a shifting of time. So we have 5 communication tips, and there's 1,000 more. I'm sure many of you, if you're on social media at some point, something's been shared with you about, the best practices with communication. And so there's many more, but I picked what I think are the 5 that are transformative, the 5 that you can easily sort of keep track of or practice, the 5 that you can modify your own approach to incorporate these so that your person is more successful. And that's really, as we talk through today, The onus is on us to adjust our approach, our communication style, our support so that our person can be successful. We can adjust. Our person will have a more difficult time adjusting. So number one, connect first. You want to gain your person's attention before you speak to them. So as you're looking at the words on the screen, that doesn't mean, like I'm in this hotel room at the conference and somebody's in the bathroom and they're like talking to me and I don't realize they're talking to me. You want to get their attention before you start speaking. And I include this image here. This is a call to action within Anthology for our team members. We say go slow to go fast. And the idea is that, if I'm going to assist a resident with the shower, for example, I may be tempted to kind of like rush through it because there are other things that need to be done. But if I go slow, invest in the connection with that resident, break each step down into manageable pieces, then the whole thing is going to go more smoothly. And in the end, it's quote unquote faster because it went better, because the person was more engaged throughout the process. They weren't alarmed or pushing back or upset. And I've invested in our relationship together, which means the next time we do something, it's probably going to go better. So go slow to go fast is invest in the relationship and break things down into small steps and connect first. Number two is model what you're saying. And the second part of that is what you see on the screen. Don't just rely on this, on verbal communication. I think so many of us, we think communication means what I'm doing now, just talking, all this verbal stuff. But especially with our people who are on this dementia journey, it's so important for us to communicate with our whole body. So you can see I do that all the time, right? I had a good friend, or have a good friend, and many years ago, he was like, you're going to need to keep your hands still. And I was like, well, how am I going to talk then? So don't simply rely on verbal communication, but try to demonstrate physically what you are saying verbally. So I picked these 3 photos for a reason. I think they're delightful, but I'm curious, you look at them. What do you think each of these individuals are saying to you? And how do you feel about them? Do you feel like welcomed? Do you trust them? Are you curious about them? So how we physically model what we're saying will help our person. So at the very simplest, I see these people saying, come with me, come here. And if I say to Janice, hey, Janice, do you want to go outside? Or come on, let's go to the ice cream shop. Maybe she's hearing and processing what I'm saying verbally. But if I say, hey, Janice, come on, let's go outside. Or hey, come on, Janice, let's get your teeth brushed. Or hey, Janice, and I sort of rub my belly. I'm kind of hungry. Come on, let's go. Let's get some ice cream. So as you model, you're going to help your person to process more and feel more comfortable. Number 3. This is probably the one that we need the most practice on. It's my guess. Maybe not for you. Number 3, speak in short, complete sentences, then pause. So short, complete sentences, I like to think of them, I'm a visual thinker, I like to think of them as like, I wrapped up this little gift for my person. I wrapped it up and now I'm giving it to them. That is a short, clear sentence. It takes some thinking ahead of time. We can't just like prattle on about whatever. But if we intentionally think, make it a short, clear sentence, and then pause. Be comfortable in the silence as our person is processing, deciding what they're going to say, and trying to say it. So I emphasize this because sometimes you'll see a family or a professional and they're having a communication with their person, and it's just like this really long sentence, or it's so complicated, or so many words, or so many like twisting turns, like I'm doing right now. But if instead you make a short, clear sentence, easier for your person to process. And then that comfort in the silence while they process, decide, respond. Maybe somebody listening to this webinar, maybe you've studied a foreign language or a different language from your birth language. And if your experience was like mine was, I'm sure at some point somebody said something to you in that language and you were like trying to figure it out. And then maybe they repeated it, or maybe they said it louder, or maybe they said a third thing entirely. And so in the meantime, you're just still like trying to think, the verb conjugation and like who they were talking to and what was the noun, like you're trying to process all, and they just keep throwing more things at you. And you're like, wait, just give me a moment to process this. The same idea for our individuals on this dementia journey. More often than not, if we've said something and our person is processing, and then we interrupt that processing to try to say it a different way or to try to help or whatever, very often we end up derailing them. So short, complete, and then comfortable in the pause. Number 4, I think is super fun, because sometimes I will hear about individuals living with dementia. Oh, so-and-so can't make a decision. Or, oh, so-and-so, I'll tell you what they want. Our individuals, and this is part of our philosophy, is that our individuals on this dementia journey are full, complete beings. They have purpose and agency and ability and choice. And so just like we talked about before about modifying our sentences or modifying our speed, etc., we modify how we offer choice so that our person can be successful. So as you're looking on the screen, you see this clothing example. And, if we were in my home and we opened up the closet, there's just so many things, right? So many colors and so many shoes. And if I am maybe a little bit further along in my dementia journey, and you just open up the closet door and you're like, what would you like? There's so many options. I may be like overwhelmed by that. Or like you see in the second picture, as they're hanging, I can't quite tell what they are. But if instead you pull out 2 and you like show them, model them, that will help me to decide. So best practice is 2 things. Best practice is model those things. So in the example here, what would you like to wear? All these different options. Or pull out the 2 things. Oh, Brenda, would you like your pink jacket? I know you really like how it feels. It's so fuzzy. Or do you want your fancy green jacket? You always feel fancy in this one. Which one would you like? That way it gives me more ability and opportunity to successfully choose. Number 5, ask success-oriented questions. So that probably doesn't make sense right off. Let me say it a different way. Don't quiz your person. Don't test them on the past. So we talked about before, it's very common, but not always, that individuals on this journey will have impacted short-term memory. So a resident I knew at my first care community years and years ago, I think of him often. And I had gone into the dining room and he was sitting at the table and there were like crumbs and rumpled up napkin. And he was a little bit, had a little food on his shirt and like crumbs. And And his neighbor had just sat down and had his, full plate. And I said, oh my goodness, Mr. S, looks like you had a great lunch. How was it? What did you like? And he didn't have the memory of lunch, but he looked down and he saw he didn't have a plate, but his neighbor had a plate. And so what I thought was such an innocent question, I ended up getting him really frustrated. He was like, well, I don't have anything to eat, and they never feed me, and I'm so hungry. And like I amped it up thinking I was just making like social chit chat. So when you ask success-oriented questions, that means you don't quiz. And you may know about your person that they have short-term memory over the last, 2 minutes, few hours, but the, stuff a little bit earlier than that is fuzzy. Or you may not know. So just good practice, don't quiz. Don't quiz on history. Do ask their opinion. Use visual cues. So we talk about modeling and visual cues often. So ask their opinion. I like to ask opinions as a way to sort of call in and validate the individual. Like they have input and choice and contribution here. And so, maybe if I'm stirring a thing in a mixing bowl and I ask a resident, like, I don't know, what do you think of it? Like, do you think I'm doing this okay? How do you think I should do it? And just inviting them to join in. Success-oriented questions are also what I think of as like observational questions. So I'm by the window, just love the view. And maybe I just say like, what do you think of it? Look at those trees, like so pretty. And just sort of like observing and inviting your person to contribute or participate. So you see some of the prompts down below. Should we go to the courtyard and sort of, visually point at the space, or sit here in these comfy couches? So that one I also use choice. What do you think of that tree? When flipping through photos or old mementos, there's something, and we'll talk in just a sec about reminiscence. This is a term we talk about in senior living, reminiscence therapy. And you may be flipping through old family photo albums and you may be able to say like, hey, auntie, like this was your wedding, wasn't it? What did you wear something old, something new, something borrowed? And then she says something blue. You may be able to ask and she may be able to tell you. Or you may want to err on the side of just open-ended questions. Hey, auntie, oh my gosh, look at this wedding photo. It looks amazing. Look at this. Oh, she's so tall. I love that dress, how it's formed on her. What do you think about that? Just like inviting in and observing. And then auntie may look at it and say, oh, well, that's me. I made that dress myself, or share some other thing. Or she may not recognize it as her, but she's still able to contribute because we haven't like asked her a narrow question. We've asked her an open question. Make sense? I was going to say another thing. I forgot it. Anyway. Okay, so a few additional items or additional tools to have in your tool belt. I would encourage you, as your person is on this journey, to think differently about what communication means. Sometimes we want that back and forth, that sort of repartee, that sort of, kind of clever or teasing or arguing. But maybe our person is not able to do that now. And maybe it needs to be slower and kind of more compact and simpler. I really like to think of communication as simply connection. For me, communication can be just sitting together, holding hands, or playing that favorite record, or I'm thinking of a specific resident right now, just ambulating with them as they explore the neighborhood. Just being connected is communication, I think. The second item I'd encourage you to consider is especially as your person progresses in the journey, is to think of how you can connect or communicate through the specific senses. And I really like touch and sound, especially. So hand massage with scented lotion. And maybe I'm your person and you know that like sandalwood, one of my favorite smells, or anything that smells kind of like dirt, right? So you're going to get that lotion and rub it on. It's such a grounding connection for us together. You may play their favorite song. You see here music, which still blows me away every time I say it. Music is processed in a different part of the brain than like verbal language. You would think it would be the same, right? But it's different. And so the ability to process or engage with or participate in music often lasts late into the journey. And it isn't just like music per se. So like I love Johnny Cash, you know, and there's that one song in particular. I don't even know what it is, but it's that one phrase. And so music is one thing, but also speech that has a pattern. So like prayers can be sort of in that same category or that same spot of the brain that's processed as music. Maybe like a, what do you call like idioms or something, like stitch in time saves 9. So those things are processed in this part of this brain that's pretty maintained. So we can use music and those other types late into the journey. And so if you haven't seen, and they'll be on the additional, I'll just mention that later, the additional resources. And then we already talked about practicing reminiscence. And this could be the old photos that your person already has, or there was this adult daughter, it's probably 8 years ago, but I think of her all the time. She was in a workshop I was leading for the Alzheimer's Association as a volunteer. And I remember she had said, and I'm going to mix up the details, but it's close. She had found where her mom grew up on like in a farming community. She'd found like the old vintage newspapers online. And so she printed them out. And they would like flip through them and reminisce, like revisit all the town gossip and the dramas of the day. And, oh, there's this sale on feed at the market. But reminiscence can be such a powerful way to connect with our person. There's even the whole branch of like sports reminiscence, and they're at least pre-pandemic, someplace in St. Louis. It was maybe St. Louis U or Washington U, one or the other. But the Cardinals are big in St. Louis, and so it was like this Cardinals reminiscing group, and for people living with dementia, and they would come together and talk about the Cardinals. Like, what a great way to. So these are some additional ways, in addition to our 5 key skills or key tips to connect. And then I included some further reading and further viewing for you. And so I'll say like a little bit about each one. And all of these are also, if you skip down to the last bullet point, all of these are also on our Anthology Memory Loss and Dementia Resource Guide. It's on our website. If you are connected with Anthology, you have a person with us, or you've been talking with us, the person you're talking to at the community can get the guide for you. I can get it for you. Just let us know how we can help. But there's a few items here that I included because I just think they give us inspiration and different ideas of how to approach communication. So Alive Inside is this documentary about the power of music and the story of Henry. I'm sure some of you have seen it on your social media or someplace else. Is such a great short video. And it's this gentleman who appears to be kind of disconnected, disengaged. And they play his favorite music, and he just sort of like brings him back, like he's like regenerated. And what he shares and the wisdom he shares and the excitement, so good. And a similar experience in the documentary, there is a bridge, and that's with Naomi File. And she's the founder of the validation method, which is something we practice at Anthology, and we're training our team members on. So impactful. And so it's Naomi Fowle with Ms. Wilson. And it's kind of a similar connection where Ms. Wilson, when you first look, appears to be not present, not connected, not sort of activated. And how Naomi connects with her through music and through touch and through patience is. Then there's some pamphlets. And then we've been talking a lot among some of my colleagues about Ann Basting. And so she wrote the book Creative Care, but she has this TED Talk, which I think is incredible. And one of the things she shares is this idea of beautiful questions. So it's a little bit similar, but pretty different from what I was talking about with like the success-oriented question. And I remember one she talked about in the book was like, she was with a person in their space and was seeing like the things that they had, and they had all these things about the sea. And she said, now Harold, or whomever, Harold, can you show me, how does the sea move? And so she was able to get him to share with her and communicate with her because he had impacted verbal communication. And so she just has this concept of these beautiful questions as a way to sort of create together or have an exchange or a connection that is different from, well, what you and I are doing right now. So that's our session. I hope this was helpful to you. We do a quarterly virtual family education session in our communities. We do a monthly support group that also has an education component. If your community doesn't, it's something we've been rolling out, so it's probably coming. But if I or we can be of any help, let us know. If maybe you're not connected with Anthology and you've been looking at us, so you're uncertain about care options for your person, just reach out to any of our communities, and we have a bunch of qualified team members who would be happy to talk with you. So thank you again, and I hope this was helpful, and I appreciate you. Take care.